Titanfall 2 is absolutely stuffed full of spectacular missions from beginning to end, but out of all of them, I think the Ark may well be the most spectacular of them all. Taking place in mid-air, it pushes your skills as a pilot to the absolute limit, and caps things off with what is by far the best boss fight in the entirety of Titanfall 2's campaign. And in this video, we're going to take a closer look at it. But before we do, as always, let's start with a quick roundup of Titanfall 2's story up to this point. Jack Cooper becomes a militia pilot after his mentor Ty Lastimosa is killed, taking control of his Titan BT-7274. The pair are tasked with upholding Lastimosa's final mission, Special Operation 217, and together the two begin to make their way to Major Eli Anderson's last known location. After some fairly unexpected time travelling, Cooper and BT discover that the militia's sworn enemy, the IMC, plan to use a super weapon named the Fold Weapon against the militia planet of Harmony. Cooper manages to scan the weapon's power source, known as the Ark, and together the pair are able to repair an interstellar beacon and send a warning, as well as the Ark's electromagnetic signature, to the militia fleet. By this point, Cooper and BT have become best buddies, with BT requesting that Cooper remain his pilot, and together they race to an IMC airbase to try and stop the Ark in transit. After an enormous battle, they're unfortunately too late, with the IMC loading the Ark onto the ship the IMS Draconis in the nick of time and escaping. Which brings us to the mission The Ark, the militia's desperate final attempt at stopping the IMC from using the Fold Weapon once and for all. The Ark kicks things off in style with a few radio messages shared between the militia, while one of my favourite tracks in the game plays in the background.
This is Commander Briggs. We have to recover the Ark. The IMC are taking it to the Fold Weapon on board the Draconis. All ships, flank speed. We have to hit them hard and fast. Briggs out.
And it also continues the escalation in terms of how its missions begin. At the start of the game, you sit opposite Lastimosa and haven't yet even become a pilot, sitting lower to the ground than the others around you. In Trial by Fire, you're truly ready to play with the big boys and sit eye to eye with the other pilots, thanks to commenter Diamond Rhino 64 for pointing that out. And finally in the Ark, well, the person briefing you is on another ship entirely. It's a great example of how Titanfall 2 continues to escalate events throughout its campaign, putting the somewhat familiar in front of players, but each time in very different circumstances. Your first task during the Ark is to use the anti-Titan rocket launcher known as the Archer to take down a few enemy ships. Much like developer Respawn Entertainment introduces different Titan loadouts throughout the campaign to get you used to using them before you jump into multiplayer, the same is true here of the Archer. It's a very useful weapon to know how to use online, and so you're given the opportunity to lock onto and take down a few enemies so that you hopefully feel more comfortable using it against human opponents in the future. If there was any doubt in your mind about whether Titanfall 2 could keep up its relentless pace all the way through to the end of its campaign, then I'd guess this next scene probably did the trick. It is an absolutely staggering display of Respawn's mastery of the more cinematic side of this subgenre of first-person shooters. You get an early glimpse at just how threatening the apex predator Viper is, made all the more apparent by the fact he takes down a number of ships with ease in quick succession, right after you've most likely managed to take down maybe one or two in much less exciting fashion, and the framing of this part of the mission only becomes even more impressive when you land on top of another ship as the battle rages ahead of you. Much like the escalation at the start of the mission, BT throwing Cooper here is a continued escalation of previous events. You had Cooper suggesting that BT throw him in effect and cause.
Nice. Maybe next time you can throw me.
Noted.
BT actually throwing Cooper in the beacon, with a bit of discussion beforehand.
My scans detect a functioning uplink targeting module, 428 meters northeast. My analysis indicates a throw is our only option here. I can throw you across the gap.
Are you sure about this?
There is a 68% chance of success.
And now in the Ark, the pair simply get on with it, without giving even a second thought to what they're doing. The next firefight inside the IMS Malta is a fairly run-of-the-mill battle, although the rest of the squad helping you out over the radio is a nice touch, which helps keep you connected to the battle outside even when your attention is focused elsewhere.
Got a guy underneath the stairs. They're around the corner. Watch your left side.
Much like Trial by Fire threw you into a mission focused on Titan combat, which never really slowed down, the Ark can be considered to be the on-foot equivalent. The MCS Carter Braxton explodes ahead of you, and you're thrown into another firefight almost immediately after. Neither mission is particularly subtle, but in a campaign that only lasts 5 to 6 hours, I think that's definitely a good thing. Other shooters with longer campaigns have a bit more time to develop an ebb and flow to their proceedings, slowing things down and speeding things up to create crescendos throughout their campaigns, but Titanfall 2 in my mind is so memorable because it doesn't do that. Respawn never takes their foot off the throttle, and it makes for an experience quite unlike any other. Next, you're joined by a number of squad mates for what is one of the coolest movement sequences in the game. In other levels you can often activate a ghost, which shows you where you need to go, which I've never been a huge fan of, but here you mimic what you've just seen instead, which is by far the more elegant solution, and one I would have liked to have seen used more during the rest of the campaign. The scene during which you join the rest of your squad to face down an IMC squad on the other side of a window is brilliant. It doesn't do anything particularly clever, but it's a great example of Respawn still being able to come up with new and interesting set pieces, even when it may feel like the Call of Duty series has done just about anything and everything you could possibly think of. I spoke of pacing earlier, and here the arc does slow down for a minute or two as you take control of the steering wheel, so to speak, and attempt to dock with the Draconis. I've never been convinced that this scene is entirely necessary, and would have preferred the pace to have been kept high, but it only lasts a short amount of time, so it's no biggie I guess. The arc is a very short mission, clocking in at a little more than 10 to 15 minutes, so I'd imagine this may have been an attempt by Respawn to squeeze a little extra length out of the level where they could. It's here we arrive at the arc's boss encounter, and as I mentioned during the intro, I think this is by far the best of any featured in Titanfall 2's campaign. It plays out in a similar fashion to many of the game's earlier boss battles in that you fight one of the apex predators with a few additional enemy titans on hand to keep you occupied, but it works so much better in my view due to Viper remaining airborne at the back of the arena while you deal with the other enemies directly ahead of you. In other boss encounters, it felt like the extra enemy titans were there to simply add filler, whereas them combining with Viper in the arc to offer both a long-range and short-range threat makes for a much more interesting experience. As an aside, I was not very complimentary of Titanfall 2's boss fights during my recent video covering the beacon, and I also received a lot of comments telling me that Master difficulty made them a much more engaging affair, so I gave the arc a go on Master, eventually managed to reach Viper, and you know what? They were right. Now, despite the footage you've seen during this video perhaps suggesting otherwise, I am fairly used to playing games at their highest difficulties. Indeed, with certain titles like The Last of Us and its grounded mode, it feels like the difficulty that best fits certain games. And I had already finished Titanfall 2 on Master around the time it released as well. But even with all that experience, Viper was very tough. In the end, I managed to beat him using Scorch to take down the other titans before switching to Tone, but it took a long time and it wasn't very pretty. My point being, the boss battles are definitely improved at higher difficulty levels. It doesn't make their actual setups any more exciting. Viper is still by far the best in that regard, but if you're a glutton for punishment, they're definitely worth trying if you fancy it. After taking down Viper, he soon returns for one final set piece, and again this adds an extra bit of variety to the encounter which I wish was present during the other boss fights. And once he's been dispatched, you make your way towards the arc with BT very visibly damaged from the encounter. At this point in the game, and after all you've been through with him, it's very easy to forget that BT is still just a machine, which is testament to how well Respawn manages to develop the relationship between Cooper and BT in the short time they had. You remove the arc from its housing, and this final scene plays out, a surprisingly touching callback to the first time you met BT.
Get the arc out of here!
Negative. We are trapped.
What are you doing?
Protocol 3. I will not lose another pilot. Brace for impact.
And as the screen fades to black, you're left with a bit of a cliffhanger. It's difficult to pick a favourite mission in Titanfall 2 as most of them are absolutely brilliant, but the arc for me is the best mission outside of Effect and Cause. With a very short runtime and a surprisingly small amount of gameplay, you might not agree, but the sheer spectacle of events and a boss battle which is vastly improved over any which preceded it, make it a mission I consider to be the quintessential set-piece driven level in the subgenre. Other missions may have more gameplay, feature interesting one-off mechanics, or pack in more exposition, but in my mind, the arc is by far the most explosive mission in a campaign which is pretty blooming explosive to begin with. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch the video, boys, girls and pilots. Do consider liking, leaving a comment and maybe even subscribing if you enjoyed it, as it really helps the channel grow, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon.